Word. Glad to be with you, my friends. We'll share the screen here and get started on the 12th chapter of Genesis. Let's see, there it goes. Yes. All right. So 2 weeks ago, we finished up the prehistory section of Genesis. That is the flood, the creation stories, the Tower of Babel, the whole 9 yards, right? It all ended up. And then we have the lineage of Abraham, which really takes us just from Noah to Abraham. It's not anything particularly exciting other than just here's what happened with these different people with a comment here or there. But today we link to the story of the patriarchs. That's really the entire rest of the book of Genesis, right? So chapters 12 through, I think it's 36. I might be wrong. It might be longer than that. It's something like that, maybe 48 even, is the whole balance of the book of Genesis then is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So we got a big chunk of folks, but now we get into the fun stuff, which is the family narrative, to say the least. So we'll go back just a little bit to sort of where Avram is introduced and start going from there. So it's 11:29. Avram and Nahor took themselves wives. The name of Avram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, daughter of Haran, father of Milcah and father of Yiscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took Avram, his son, and Lot, son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, wife of Avram, his son. They set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. And the days of Terah were 5 years and 200 years. Then Terah died in Haran. The Lord said to Avram, "Go you forth from your land, from your kindred, from your father's house, to the land that I will let you see. I will make a great nation of you, and will give you blessing, and will make your name great. Be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. He who curses you, I will damn. All the clans of the soil will find blessing through you." Avram went, as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Avram was 5 years and 70 years old when he went out of Haran. Avram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, all their property that they had gained, and the persons whom they had made their own in Haran. And they went out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Avram passed through the land as far as the place of Shechem, as far as the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. The Lord was seen by Avram and said, "I give this land to your seed." He built a slaughter site there to the Lord, who had been seen by him. He moved on from there to the mountain country east of Bethel and spread his tent. Bethel toward the sea and Ai toward the east. There he built a slaughter site to the Lord and called out the name of the Lord. Then Avram journeyed on, continually journeying to the Negev. All right, so here's the movement from universal story of humanity, all those background information, to the specific story of Israel, right? And what will eventually become Israel, we should say. Of course, this is just the story of Avram, as we start, but it becomes the story of Israel, right? And as Brueggemann notes in detail, the change is, well, that Sarai is barren. There's no judgment in that situation, no punishment, but there is a significant problem, right? You have this list of all these people who successfully had generations of children and families, and now suddenly there's an issue, right? It's pretty jarring if you read that entire chapter, which pretty much most of chapter 11 is a list of begatting to other people, right? And then suddenly you have Sarai, who is barren. And there's obviously a big issue. So Brueggemann phrases it this way: barrenness is the way of human history. It is an effective metaphor for hopelessness. There is no foreseeable future. There is no human power to invent a future. Pretty harsh rendition of barrenness, but I guess it's accurate. But in that context, then, for for Brueggemann comes the speech of God, the word of God comes in, right? So Brueggemann says it this way: if it had been our task to begin a new history, we would have done so in a more hopeful context. But not this God. Inexplicably, this God speaks his powerful word directly into a situation of barrenness. This is the ground of the good news. This God does not depend on the potentiality of the one addressed. Well, that was an interesting quote, right? It's this sort of idea that God almost intentionally picks someone who has no hope or no options, knowing that they might well depend on God more. That's not what Brueggemann's saying exactly, but I'm going to read into his lines a little bit. Certainly that God almost picks them because they don't have hope, because they don't have options. So for Brueggemann, then, this story is the prototype, the pattern for how God will act in the world, speaking life and hope into moments of death and loss and despair. Brueggemann then goes so far as to actually talk about how this moment is a foretaste of the crucifixion and resurrection, right? Like you have a situation that looks like death, but God will bring life even out of death. I try not to do that. I'll be honest. This is one of those things, as a Christian, we can do that. That's not the end of the world to do that. But I try not to do that because it tends to distract from what we're trying to learn about the text for what it is, right? When you read Jesus on top of all the texts, I do believe Jesus is part of the whole story from start to finish. But I think sometimes we end up doing violence to the text just because you end up laying on top of it what Paul said, or what name this other saint. Augustine said this about that moment. It's interesting, but at the same time, I'm more interested in what the text says than necessarily trying to pull out themes in a sort of eisegetical way, that is, reading it into the text. So we then have God's promise, right? So in this barrenness, in this emptiness, God then makes a promise to Avram. God promises several things, right? He promises, number one, to make him a great nation, to magnify his name, to bless them, and to bless those who bless them, and to curse those who curse them. So if you want to take each of those as separates, there are 5 things that God's promising to do. I think you could also argue it's one really big promise that God's going to basically make them a big deal and protect them all along the way. Either way, God is making a pretty significant covenant with someone that we literally don't know in the text, right? All we know is Sarai is barren. We don't know if Avram is a good man or a bad man. We know nothing other than he's the son of Terah, right? I mean, that's all we got. We got nothing else, which is a fascinating place, right? And these are serious gifts. Brueggemann says they are an index of what we all crave: well-being, security, prosperity, and prominence, which I think I agree with. I mean, I think that is exactly what God's promising Avram. You're going to be taken care of. You're going to be secure. I'm going to protect you. You're going to be rich and well cared for. And even more, people are going to think you are a big deal, buddy. It's an interesting promise, right? It almost sounds like a temptation, quite frankly. It's one of those, honest to God, if I had a conversation with God, I'd be like, okay, what's the catch? What do I owe? If you're going to give me all these wonderful things, here's your well-being and your security and prosperity and prominence. Yeah, okay, what I got to do to make all this happen? In this case, God actually does make it pretty clear. Well, you've got to give up your family and go to a new place, right? I'm going to take you to Canaan, get you out of all these places that you're not supposed to be and into the place I want you. Interesting. So I agree with Brueggemann, but I am fascinated by a particular thought that he sort of indirectly brings up, and that is, could God's promise make of any human a great nation, or did it have to be Avram? Right? It's absolutely clear that this is something we all want. We all desire everything that is promised to Avram. So would we all be as faithful as Avram if we knew that God was 100% on our side the way Avram did? Or is it something about Avram that God said, well, he deserves this blessing and I'm going to raise him up and give him all these things as a result, right? It's the great what if of Scripture. Did God's grace and unmerited love create Avram? Or did Avram as a man have a quality that God liked? I'll pause there. I introduced a lot all at once. What do y'all think of Avram and God's promise in the midst of barrenness?
Well, to me, it sort of begs the question too, well, what about people who don't have those gifts, don't have security and prosperity? And maybe that's not really the point you're trying to make, I know, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's all connected. I mean, yeah, my point is a little different, but it's not unrelated either, right? I mean, it's that kind of thing, especially if you work with people in need. They don't have any of those four things, right? They don't have prominence. They don't have any, like you're saying. And so it's that kind of, well, how different could the world be for someone who is without security or prominence or resources, right? I mean, that can be just as life-changing for them as it is for Avram. For any of us.
I just have a question. At this point in time, is Avram a Jew?
No,
he's certainly
he's
not an Israelite. He's just a regular human being, right? He's a
regular human being. There's no such thing as a Jew, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
He is of the descendants of Shem, so he's a Semite. We would say that, but that doesn't necessarily really qualify him in anything to be exemplary until later we learn that there's that promise. But yeah, I mean, that's the challenge.
At this point in time in Genesis, is there really a Jewish faith yet? No, I didn't think so.
No, there's nothing that you would call a Jewish faith.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, there are these sort of like building. I love that the Shocking Bible calls them slaughter sites instead of altars, because that is the point of an altar, right? In the ancient world, was you didn't build a big thing of stone to just have it be pretty. It's to kill something on it to offer it to God, right? So I actually like that slaughter site language. But there is this inclination that Avram understands that he has a relationship with God and that he needs to make offerings to God. So there's a relationship there of some sort, right? I mean, the fact that he keeps going and building altars and then therefore probably making some sort of burnt sacrifice gives you a pretty clear idea that he has an idea of worship and relationship, but it's certainly not the 613 laws that would come later with Moses, right? I mean, there's nothing close to that sort of codified relationship.
So the question becomes, why Avram or Abraham, right? Why?
Right. Why Abraham? Why Avram?
Well, why? Exactly. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, the question you asked too, right?
Yeah, that's a fundamental question. I mean, it's
a fundamental question. Why?
Why this dude? Why not Lot? Why not, I don't know, Terah? Why not? There's all kinds of names, right? I mean,
I don't have an answer for why not me, Bill, but that's
amen.
Okay.
Amen.
Well, yeah, I'm not. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I didn't have anything else. I was just going to turn, but go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm certainly not, I wouldn't consider myself great among nations, but I can certainly relate to being made new out of barrenness. And I can certainly relate to God having a relationship with me, whether I was having a relationship with God or not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can look after the fact and see grace through a lot of crap that I wasn't seeing at the time and that I wasn't trusting or believing at the time. So it's, it's the whole why Avram, I mean, why me?
Sure.
And I also have a question. Why did God find the necessity to make a great nation?
Absolutely. That is the secondary question, right? Like why does it have to be Avram, and why is that? Yeah. Why do you need your chosen people, right?
And it's led to some very historic challenges, okay, that go to this day,
To this day.
yes, that exist today in 2022. Yep.
And don't look like they're going away anytime soon.
Oh, I don't think they'll ever go away, to be honest with you, but that's okay.
Right.
Well, the story is told looking back.
Of course.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's told at a point where the nation has been created, right? And so, the perspective is, how did we get this? How did we come to this point where we are? What's our backstory?
Yeah. Good question.
And so, I guess that there's sort of, I can't remember exactly how explicit it is, but I think there is this notion of faith. Certainly Paul talks about that, and we want to avoid Paul's interpretation, but we get the story of the angels or whomever that come to visit, and the hospitality, and so at least there's some sense of not explicit statement that this was a righteous man, maybe. And yet we also see as we go through these travels, and he misrepresents Sarah, that he's not a perfect guy, that's for sure.
Nope, he is not by a long shot.
Well, that's the beauty. That's the whole beauty of the Old Testament. Okay, everybody is really human. Okay, David. David's a murderer, for God's sake. Okay, and
yeah, there's certainly a message that God will work with. God doesn't expect you to be perfect to work with you.
No,
he'll settle for less, and
a whole lot less.
And ultimately, what he's looking for is faith.
Yeah. Absolutely. And even when you don't reach that mark, he's usually going, okay, let's do it again. Let's try again.
Bill, you need to stop asking questions for which there are no answers. I just thought okay, I just thought I mentioned that. That's all.
I've decided that's his favorite thing to do.
It's my favorite thing to do.
Okay, is that Bill's favorite?
Well, it's no fun if I give you one that has a clear answer. That's like the softball pitch. Like, that doesn't do anything for anybody. We got to ask the bigger questions if we're going to look at the text. Otherwise, it's just the text, right?
We could just keep going on this. This is like the never-ending whatever.
Absolutely.
It's like Lynn mentioning righteousness. I would ask the question, what the heck is righteousness? But let's not go there. Let's keep away from that for now.
Yeah. Well, in this case, I asked the question intentionally. So for our sisters and brothers in Judaism, Avram was an exemplary character, right? He is Father Abraham. He is someone to be revered. And recognizing that the story favoring Avram showed up out of nowhere, they created a midrash. That is a story designed to open up and explain the story, right? That's a very old tradition in Judaism, that they tell stories to help understand random lines in the text, or in this case, wait, why did God choose Avram? So someone wrote a midrash to say, here is why God chose Avram, right? And so most Jews believe that this story is literally in the Bible. If you were to ask a Jew, is this story in the Bible? They would say yes, but it said it's a midrash on the Bible. Christians don't usually know that this midrash even exists, because that's not in our tradition. But in Judaism, it's literally one of the seminal stories of the faith, which I find endlessly fascinating, right? So I'm going to read you the story just to give you some background, and just to help us sort of engage, maybe open it up a little bit more. Abraham's family used to make images and sell them in the market. That is, they were idol makers. One day, when it was Abram's turn to sell, his father Terah gave him several baskets of household gods and set them up in the marketplace. A man came to him and asked, "Have you a god to sell?" Abraham, "What kind of god do you wish to buy?" The man, "I am a mighty man. Give me a god as mighty as I am." So Abraham took an image that was standing on a shelf higher than all the others and said, "Pay the money and take this one." The man asked, "Is this God as mighty as I am?" Abraham replied, "You good for nothing. Don't you know the way of the gods? The one who sits above all others is the mightiest of all." As the man was about to leave, Abraham asked him, "How old are you?" The man answered, 70 years. And Abraham said, "Woe to a man who is 70, yet prostrates himself before this thing which was made only today." At that, the man flung that god back into Abraham's basket, demanded the return of his money, and went on his way. Next came a widow who said to Abraham, "I am a poor woman. Give me a god as poor as I am." At once, Abraham took an image that was on a shelf lower than all the others and said, "To suit your poverty, take this god who is humble, placed as he is on a shelf far below all the others. But he will not budge until you pay me the money." So she paid the price, and as she was about to depart, he asked her, "How old are you?" And she replied, "Quite old." Abraham then said, "May the breath of such a woman be blasted. To think that one so old prostrates herself before a God who is only 1 day old." She immediately dropped the god into the basket, got her money back from Abraham, and went her way. Then Abraham took all the gods and brought them back to his father Terah. Terah's other sons said to their father, "This Abraham does not know how to sell gods. Come then, and let us make him a priest." Abraham asked, "What is a priest's work?" They replied, "He waits upon the gods, offers sacrifices to them, and serves them food and drink." So they made him a priest. And Abraham promptly set food and drink before the images and said to them, "Come and eat, come and drink, so that you may be able to bestow good upon human beings." But not one of them took anything at all to eat or to drink. Then Abraham began to recite the verse, "They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes they have, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Noses have they, but they smell not. They have hands, but they handle not. Feet have they, but they walk not." Which is Psalm 115, 5-7. A woman came carrying a bowl of fine flour, and that's Flour. Thanks, autocorrect. Like wheat flour, and said, "Here, offer it to the gods." At that, Abraham seized a stick, smashed all the images, and placed the stick in the hand of the biggest of them. And when his father came, he asked, "Who did this to the gods?" Abraham answered, "Would I hide anything from my father?" A woman came with a bowl of fine flour, it did it again, and said, "Here, offer it up to them." When I offered it, one god said, "I will eat first," and another god said, "No, I will eat first." Then the biggest of them rose up and smashed all the others. His father replied, "Are you making sport of me? They cannot do anything." Abraham answered, "You say they cannot. Let your ears hear what your mouth is saying." All right. So that's the story. It's totally unofficial, but at the same time, it's in Judaism, the officially unofficial but official explanation for why God chooses Avram in Judaism. He's an idol smasher. He somehow knew that all these idols were false and there was something bigger. And then God comes along to reveal that indeed God is one God and is a bigger deal, right? So they recognized within the story that there's not really a reason for why Avram gets chosen. So they created the reason within another tale, right? And again, most Christians don't know this story. We don't have it. It is just a story, but it is an interesting sort of backstory. It's a fun way to think of Avram, especially being that cheeky, quite frankly. He's a pretty big smart ass old Abraham in this story. What do y'all think of that tale of Midrash to help open up the text? Does it open the text?
I was gonna say, I'm waiting to see what you're gonna do with that hot mess.
Hot mess. Why is that a hot mess?
Huh?
Why is that a hot mess?
Breath smashing and putting money in and taking money back. And
Oh yeah.
It got better, but it was off. That little bit was off to a rough start for me.
Yeah, the main story that most Jews know is the idol smasher part, right? Like that, the sort of end part of the tale, where it's just, you know, he offers flour and then smashes all the other gods and puts it in the hand of the largest, and his dad says they can't do anything. He's like, well, you said it, not me, kind of thing, just to reveal the foolishness of worshiping a graven image, right?
Yeah.
That's the part that most Jews would be able to say that's the midrash, right? That's the story. And they would think, honestly, because it's told so often and so much a part of the story of Abraham, they would say, oh, that's in the Bible. But it's not. As we know, we don't know that story otherwise.
I like
Was the woman that got her breath blasted, was she worshiping a graven image? Maybe that's what I wasn't following.
Yes, yeah, no, she was asking for a poor god, like she was a poor god. She was a poor woman. She wanted a poor god, a lower level god or whatever.
Oh, okay.
He didn't actually take breath from her. He just said, "May your breath be blasted," right? Like, sort of cursing at her for being dumb.
Okay, well, that makes it make more sense then. I wasn't tracking.
Yeah.
Is there like a collection of midrashes, the plural?
It's midrash or midrashim, but you can usually people that say midrash. Yeah, there's a whole book, the Sefer Midrash, which literally has got hundreds and hundreds of stories. It's fun just to look at and see. And they're a big deal in Judaism. I mean, they don't not all of them are, but this is one of the big ones. The other huge one that I bet some of y'all have even heard is there's a moment when they cross the Red Sea and all the angels, the people of Israel rejoice because all of the Egyptians are drowned, and the angels begin to rejoice, and they go and say, God, why aren't you rejoicing? The enemies of Israel have been destroyed. And that God says, why would I weep? My children have just drowned. And it's this sort of fascinating story of like, well, if God is the God of all, then that's while it's a victory for Israel, it's a day of tragedy for God, right? That he has to choose, and he has to make it, and people have to die. So there's there's some great stories in there, and it's an old tradition. It's certainly around the time of Jesus and earlier, which to me, if you understand that Midrash is part of the way for Jews to understand Scripture, then Jesus's parables make a lot more sense, right? Like why he keeps telling stories to unlock stories, because the parables are parables, but they're also Midrash, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, he is telling Midrash, like, oh, how do I know who my neighbor is? Oh, well, let me tell you a story about who your neighbor is. It's pure Midrash. We call it a parable, but it's absolutely in that same idea.
Okay.
Let me see. The biggest one, it's a huge one. You're welcome to borrow it from me anytime. It's called the Book of Legends. There it is.
Oh, wow.
Book of Legends, Sefer Haggadah. It's about 800 pages long. Big giant book. But whenever I tend to do a study, like when we do a study with Ron here for texts we have in common, I'll look at it too, just to see other ways of hearing the story or understanding the story, because that's where the brilliance of Midrash comes. Is it just helps open things up a little differently.
Is there an era attached to when these were written, or?
Oh, it's hundreds of years. Hundreds. I mean, I think they sort of codified some of them around 1600, something like that. But people still tell stories and do it that way. I mean, they'll talk about modern Midrash all the time. Like good rabbis will still use Midrash. It's John Porter may make fun of me, but I would say John Porter is the master of Midrash in his preaching, right? Like he tells stories to open up stories. He doesn't explain the stories. He doesn't go, well, this is why this matters. That's not John's style. John's style is the storyteller / I'm going to tell a story that's related to this story and let you figure out how that opens it up, right? It's that's why I think we all love his preaching, because it is exactly this sort of model of telling a story to open a story.
Hmm.
Did you ever read, I'm sure some of y'all read it, The Red Tent?
Yes.
If you go back and read her introduction says, "This is my midrash."
Oh, interesting.
That she's like, I wanted to know what the women were doing while the men were doing all the other stuff, right? And so she tells the midrash of what the women were doing while Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are doing all their things, right? So there's not the a sort of official end date for midrash because they understand it to be a living part of the faith.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Sure. Yeah, we'll talk about it more certainly as we go along because there are other little midrash that show up on some of these tales that help, I think, help open it, right? I mean, literally, we just had the first 9 verses of chapter 12. It's not a whole lot, but there is this sort of fundamental question of faith that, like Lynn said, Paul would absolutely say, oh, it was reckoned to Abraham as faith, as righteousness, right? That God just said, oh, well, you're a faithful soul. Let me pick you, or you're faithful to God, so you'll be chosen to do this kind of thing, right? So in the New Testament, we're wrestling with why was Abraham chosen? In this text itself, it just sort of says he's chosen. We don't have a reason, but it's sort of that same thing that we were wrestled with Cain and Abel, right? Why did God like Abel's offering more than Cain's? There's not an official explanation given, but God sure caused a mess by liking it more, didn't he? I think on one level, it's not God's fault that Cain killed his brother, but God certainly didn't help this situation by favoring someone over another. Let me say it differently. Or for Cain to feel like God loved Abel more. I don't know that God did love Abel more, but Cain felt like God did, right? Which is how a lot of us can feel in a lot of different situations, which creates all kinds of problems. God loves Israel more than us. If God loves our neighbor more than us, that group gets all the breaks. I don't get any.
No, let's not feel sorry for ourselves now.
I don't feel sorry. I'm just saying that's what the root of a whole lot of evil.
Yeah,
When we play that victim card and we think that God has not taken care of us at all, right? Or we get left out.
It's a scary way to think, Bill. A very scary way to think.
It is a scary way to think. I'm not advocating. I'm just saying as we talk about faith, this is those things that end up in it, right? I mean, I think we could talk about how Russia pretty much, that's their entire narrative, right? Like about all kinds of things, how victimized they've been by the West and they deserve X, Y, or Z because they've been so treated horribly and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, what are you talking like? But if you have that victimization model or I've been wronged model, it can lead to some dark conversations in bad places for sure. Which isn't what we're talking here. We're just trying to figure out's not even the right word. It's just to have a conversation about Abraham and how this all starts, right? All right, I'm picking. All right, so there was an old quote that we used to see on church billboards that I particularly love, and we sort of referenced it earlier. Lynn certainly did. But I think it's probably on our minds indirectly. It's that God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called, right? I used to see it around on a lot of church billboards. It's one of my favorites. I don't know, personally, the text itself, I think is more connected to that quote than it is to anything else. There's no reason given at all for why God chose Avram. And as we said, he's not a perfect guy. He's scared. He's unsure. He doesn't have a lot of faith. He even tries to go around God, has a son by Hagar instead of trying to have a son with Sarah. I mean, Abram is not a perfect guy. So I don't believe he's uniquely qualified to be Father Abraham. I think God says, I'm going to work with you and I'm going to qualify the call. I'm going to call you and we're going to work together and make it work, right? I'm going to bring life out of the barrenness. I'm going to bring hope out of despair. I'm going to work with you and to see if we can't do this together. That's my interpretation of the text, or my belief about the text, but it's also my belief about, well, life in general. That God is more than willing to work with every single one of us and call us and work with us in situations that we can't imagine we could actually handle or do. And in some cases, we can't handle it and we don't live up to it. And that's okay too. But I think that God still is going to keep calling us into trying something and doing something, right?
I mean, like he did Paul?
Like he did Paul, like he does me, like he does everybody.
Like I said he, it's God, okay, I shouldn't have said he because it could be a she too, right? Okay. but
Right.
At any
Right.
rate, all right.
Well, so I'm sure I've told lots of people this, but it's one of my favorite quotes from my liturgics professor. We were talking and he said God and then said he or father or something like that. And
Mhm.
someone spoke up very quickly and said, or she, and he goes, it's fascinating. I always am corrected when I refer to God as he, but never when I refer to the devil as he.
Yeah.
There's no gender equity for the other side.
Absolutely. Okay, there you go. Okay.
And I'm completely fine with God being beyond gender and sex. That doesn't bother me in the least. To say she, the mother God, does not bother me in the least. But it's just sort of a snarky, funny
But
comment.
Mother Devil is harder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. I understand, Bill. All right.
Yeah.
Not harder in my case. That's a whole other hour.
Oh, nice.
How
Nice.
did it go? I'm sitting here. We're sitting here in Genesis. We're talking about the Abraham story. How do we get where we're at now?
Well, this is the brilliance of the stories, quite frankly, because
Yeah.
there's not a lot to them, but so you have to ask the questions, right? Like,
Right.
because there's just, as I just put up there, right? It's the text is ambiguous. It doesn't say why God chose. It doesn't say why Abraham agreed. It's really, quite frankly, weird. You're like, wait, did Abram know God? Did he just hear a voice in his head? Was God walking by and said, "Hey, come follow me"? I mean, there's
we
so
now
many
know,
questions.
Bill. We now know he's the idol smasher. Now we know.
Well, he's the idol smasher, yeah.
There you go.
And sometimes it can be that, right? I mean,
you gave me the answer. God bless you.
there you go. He's the idol smasher. Or, I mean, on some level, what I think what the story can be within that idol smasher story is sometimes we don't know the answer, but we know that what the answers given to us aren't the right ones. Right? There's an itch to scratch. We know that, well, you keep saying these idols are important, but they're not. They're stupid. They're not doing anything. They just sit there. And if I ask them for help, nothing ever happens. There's got to be a better answer, right? And we go looking for the better answer. Could be that. Could be that too. I mean, there's all those layers that are wrapped up into this very simple story that, as we walk through Genesis, I think are the important questions to ask. I mean, we can go through and easily chart like, well, Abraham did this, and then he went here and he did that, and then we did this. Those are the easy parts of Genesis. The interesting parts of Genesis are why, or what's God doing here, or why did they not do that, right? I mean, there's all those questions, pro and con, that are far more fascinating to me about the book than purely the story itself. I mean, the stories themselves are fascinating, but the whys and hows and what fors are that's where my faith lives. Or as one of my favorite quotes in Judaism is between every 2 lines of Torah, there is white fire. Right? Or they actually say it 2 different ways. Between every 2 lines of Torah, there is fire, or between every 2 letters of Torah, there is fire. They say it both ways, right? That there's all these things in between the text that we've got to answer and think on and pray on and wrestle with God about, right? It's not purely the black and white, the black text, right, that we read and we skip the rest. All right, so Brueggemann does point nope, that's the wrong one. That's all I had this week, my friends.
Oh,
We'll be on next week. We'll jump back in and continue next week. Avram takes a journey into Egypt and decides to tell Pharaoh his wife is his sister. And we learn real quick that Avram and Sarah are both a little bit different, to say the least. But we'll look at that story and get into some of the tales pretty quickly. It takes off quick for how Avram deals with his neighbors and with God and everyone in between. So it'll be good. Hope your appointment goes well, Stefan.
Thank you. I'm going to sneak out of here. Thank you. Okay.
Take care,
Yes,
y'all.
best wishes, Stefan.
It was good. It's good, all of you. Okay, it really is. Okay.
Okay.
And look forward to it. This is getting good, Bill. I'm enjoying
Good.
this. So,
Yeah, I figure we'll just take our time and have a good time with this stuff.
okay.
All right, my
Later.
friends.
Thanks
Take
so
care.
much.
Thanks for a good reference, Lynn. Lynn, thanks for a good reference. He got right back to me.
All right, take care, y'all.
Bye.